Happy Tuesday. And we've got some really phenomenal guests today that are going to bring some ideas about engagement and not in the sense that you think it's going to be traditional engagement. It's really going to push all of us to start thinking how we can do it a little differently, a little more compassionately, and maybe a little more empathetically, not only for the residents and the older adults, but also for that team. Can't forget about our team members that also need that same level of engagement. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Wells, who's going to introduce our wonderful guests.
Well, thanks, Francis. I'm so excited to have Sara and Kelly here with us of LE3 Solutions. I've been talking with both of you kind of off and on over the last year-ish, and I could not wait to get you on the show because I believe in my conversations with you that you are both Mavericks. You're pushing the envelope. You want to see big change in the industry, and you're taking action. So can't wait to have that conversation. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourself. Sara, do you want to tell our audience who you are and a little bit about your background?
Sure. So Sara Kyle, founder and principal at LE3 Solutions. And from a background, spent the last 13 years in the space of what we call senior living across the continuum of care. But my background is predominantly exercise science. I have a PhD in kinesiology. So movement, well-being, holistic wellness is right in my wheelhouse of importance. And so LE3 is almost a year old now and working with, solutions, operators, providers, and teams just to elevate this idea of engagement, talk more about it, look at new ways to do it, and, kind of your point, kind of come out guns blazing. So thanks for having us.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, absolutely. And Kelly, share a little bit about who you are and your background and how you guys, both of you can jump in and talk about how you created LE3 Solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Francis, for having us today. My name is Kelly Stramberg, also principal at LE3 Solutions. My background's going to sound like I'm just repeating Sara. Also, 13 years in the industry, everything resident wellness, resident engagement. Also have a master's in exercise science. So came into the industry really honing in on movement, physical activity, exercise prescription for our residents, and just kind of mushroomed into everything engagements. And I joined Sara at her consulting firm, LE3 Solutions, 6 months ago. And really, we are just always have been just so passionate about this piece of the business and that it could look so different and that it needs to look so different and needs to be delivered in such a new way. Sara and I find ourselves challenged often when we see things that maybe look childlike occurring in a community. And we always ask ourselves, why? How did this happen? And how can we pivot the thinking? What kind of solutions and resources can we be putting forth so that we can really start to deliver programs that truly support quality of life for an individual, whatever that may mean for them, and how can we deliver it in a much more dignified adult-like manner that makes sense? Our residents are adults, so Sara and I always say, we'll ask people all the time, what would you do? If you're going to host an event, what would you do for you and your friends or you and your family? And just starting to think a little bit differently in how we move forward with these different activities and events.
What a great mind shift. Go ahead, Sara.
Yeah. It's funny, how we came together. It's a calamity of errors, really. Having to fight through this ongoing notion that engagement has a seat somewhere, but we don't know what table it's at. And so, we don't know what executive is going to oversee it, who's going to support it. It kind of gets tossed around. And from that being tossed around multiple times, we both had job cuts, department eliminations, and but want to press on and maybe bring the conversation to a different level, and taking those experiences and kind of just those setbacks and trying to turn them into something more important and more just proactive, I would say.
Can I ask this? I mean, this is just listening and our little conversation we had before the show today. Do you feel that there's a hierarchy to priorities when it comes to senior living? Like, we have X, Y, and Z, and maybe engagement is well below where it should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think any of us can disagree that occupancy is pretty important for all of us. So, it's the piece of the puzzle that supports all of us and all the wonderful, passionate things that we do, from care to culinary and dining services to the housekeepers to your engagement professionals. So I still think that kind of is king intentionally. But I think beyond that, and Sara and I come at this from a different perspective, and people may challenge us, but we really feel that engagement and care piece need to be equal. Yes, care is a significant piece of why people would pursue communal living in our industry. But what else besides the clinical piece of the puzzle can we do to truly support the individual? And that's where we come into play. And that's where activity and enrichment and engagement professionals come into play but what about this whole other piece of who I am as an individual? I'm not just a diagnosis. I'm not just a set of ADLs that I need help with. What about everything else that makes me a whole person and allows me to live life on my terms for as long as possible?
Right. That makes total sense. I guess go ahead. Sorry, Sara, go ahead.
So it's interesting. And I bought into this notion a lot. So I think it is a ongoing, situation that we can't find a solution to when you talk about that budget. And there is a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is basically divided by departments, and whatever budget that is in that department goes to the top of that hierarchy, right? And with it becomes you're overseeing, the bigger the budget that you oversee, the more people you have, the more influence you have, and I think the more stature you have, right? And so I always battled with that yes, I was a peer to dining or culinary. I was a peer to clinical. I was a peer to physical plant, right? In sales and marketing. But because my budget was a fraction of what those budgets were, there was this kind of knockdown of you're just not there yet, right? Your budget's so small. But until we reverse that, it's going to be that hierarchy. It's the same as being like the kindergarten teacher, you're just not as important as a sixth grade teacher because, you're only teaching ABCs. Until we squash it, something's got to change.
Well, I bring that up because we're seeing historic low occupancies across the industry. And my curiosity, I will literally say that is this the shift that families are now starting to realize what actually matters? Does the building matter? Is it more of who's taking care of my mom, how they're engaging with my loved one, or how they're actually that relationship they're building versus the building itself?
Well, and I would add to that, sometimes it can be both, but I think about it as the mental health. The mental and emotional health of the person, the individual. So often we see in communities, the people who were maybe really vibrant in life and they move in, but they shut down and they don't want to go to all these amazing activities that are being offered to them because no one's really taken the time to sit down and find out what they want and how they can get involved. And maybe they aren't an activities person. Maybe it is an individual one-on-one, but to Sara's point, there's no budget to do that. There's not enough resources to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, Frances, the other part of your question there is, and I think anybody who in your audience who's been in senior living a long time and has maybe traveled about the country, going in and out of communities, you have that community that's 50 years old. And you might be walking through those doors wondering, what am I going to see? And you will see the most amazing interaction and your residents living to the fullest. But what does it always come back to? It comes back to people.
Right.
I've had the pleasure of working in brand new buildings. They're gorgeous, But if you don't have the right staff, and then as the employers support your staff, have a culture where they feel that they love coming to work every day, which then translates over into how they interact with the residents. So yeah, having beautiful communities is awesome, but there's still that people piece of the puzzle that we must foster and support all the time, staff and residents.
So true. And I don't know what, we didn't talk about this question, but tell me what you think about how all of that fits into the culture of a community.
Yeah, I think culture starts with onboarding of staff. How important that is. What is, when you welcome new team members, what is that experience? Right? I don't think that you can have a great culture for just resident facing and not a great culture that's staff facing. And it's, it's everything from we're providing services for older adults, but we're not taking our whole emphasis is not just to care for people, right? And trying to teach that. I mean, there's so many organizations that have tried to do that, right? This is a partnership. We're caring for people who need services, but how do you still make room for autonomy and independence and improvement, right? It's not an easy mind shift to understand. It takes some time of how do I empower but then serve, right? They're quite oppositional or opposing terms. And I think that's all in the culture of empowering your staff, right? You have policies, you have procedures, but then you also empower staff to make decisions and you trust them.
And you teach them, right? You teach them. Something we learn a lot in my other business is communities that are afraid to allow the frontline care staff to communicate directly with family easily. And that just makes me insane because it's like, don't worry about what they're going to say. Teach them how to communicate. Teach them what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how to be transparent without putting you in a difficult situation. But you said something, Sara, that's so brilliant, that how can we have a really good culture for our residents if we don't have a good culture for our staff? And yes, you can teach culture, but I'm a firm believer you have to walk the walk. You have to lead by example for culture. And it's a tough thing to do when you're in an industry like this and you're running around with so many different things. Everybody's so busy.
But Catherine, I'll pose that question though. If a community's not going to let someone use a piece of technology that has no physical impact on somebody, but they're going to let them do a hands-on skill, that's backwards if you think about it. I mean, you're literally trusting someone to do one of the most intimate experiences of dressing or grooming or anything like that. Now all of a sudden you're saying, well, I trust you to do that, but I don't trust you to use an app.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
That's really interesting.
I mean, that's personal. I mean, I personally have done, dressing and grooming, and that is an intimate experience that has to be taken with the most reverence and grace, because a lot of times when you're working with someone like we do, having cognitive issues, you have to be very mindful of where they are that day to get that engagement. And there's nothing more, both probably from their perspective, as intrusive but necessary than when it comes to doing those things. And so I'm a believer that if you can do that with the fullest capacity, you can figure out how to message somebody. And I mean, I'm not trying to downplay, but you see the level of just connection in that environment. You're not, I don't know. It just is mind-boggling when I hear that, because I hear the same thing.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point, and I love that you said that, because from my big corporate risk management, right, what we want to keep a hold of, sometimes we overfocus. We were talking before this about people don't expect perfection, right? And some of our fears are, what if they obviously there's HIPAA violations. I get some of that, but who cares if they misspell a word? Who cares if they use an emoji, right? It's okay. Right. Kelly, you mentioned this. I'd rather have some type of communication than silence. And I will take the flaws of imperfect communication as long as you give me something to work with. And I've been guilty of that, right? I tried to police newsletters and language that went out because we couldn't have grammar errors or spelling errors. And now I think back of like, is that really what matters?
Right.
You know what? You just made me think of an example of something we did a few years ago. I still worked in a community, and we did this program called Fitness Partner. And one of my exercise physiologists would really, they're like teeny tiny personal training sessions, but for our residents in long-term care, memory care, assisted living. What made it unique was they were required after the session to send a weekly update email to the families, whoever the family contact was in our point click care system. The enhanced relationships that came out of that with the families, it was something I had never intended. It was never an outcome, even on my radar. We had family members who were then, when they were coming to visit their loved one, were emulating what we were doing in those sessions, because we would share, hey, I took mom outside in the garden and we stood up and down 5 times from the bench that's on the far west side of the community. They started to do that. And what it did is it started to give structure and purpose to their visits. They started to interact much more thoughtfully and a little bit more, I hate to say it like this, but much more in an educated fashion, especially for those with cognitive impairment, because they were learning from these sessions we were conducting, but we were giving them all this detail. And that to me was the greatest win in the entire world. Yeah, we were moving and doing physically great things, but what the families got out of that piece of communication, couldn't put a price on. It was the greatest outcome of it all.
That's cool. That's really cool.
I absolutely can see that. It was unintended education. And as a family member, I can put myself in that role of having seen that and then visiting a loved one and saying, oh, wow, I know something and I can help my mom, exercise. We don't have to just walk around in circles, which is what my mom loved to do. So that's what we did. But I could have added more variety for her and had a more meaningful relationship with her as well. So that's the part that I think a lot of people also don't see is when you do things like that, Kelly, and family gets more engaged and builds a relationship with you, now we have a better relationship with our loved one too. So it serves nothing but good.
What we find, we have used Serenity, and what we're finding is families are now sharing things that they've done with their loved one that we then in turn can try, and then we're vice versa sharing back with them. And so when family comes to visit, they're doing some of the things that we do. So it's been a very collaborative share as to how we've have done some things and they're doing some things, because we've had families go, I never knew my dad liked to paint or he loved to participate in music. And so when they come, that gives them discussion topics, but also things to do, like you were saying, Kelly, that now their visits are fun. It's not just sitting there wondering, what do I do? What do I talk about? Or what questions should I not ask, or should I ask? And it's just really cool to see when you start to open those channels up, the knowledge that can be shared back and forth.
Yeah, and it becomes a two-way street, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about a lot of things, and we've been talking just now about the role of families. But I want to also talk about the role of technology and what you're seeing or what you want to see now that we're all sort of coming out of COVID, or maybe we'll never be out of COVID, but at least can take a breath and lift our heads up and start seeing things a little differently. What are your thoughts on that?
You want to touch on tech, and I'll talk on we should focus coming out?
Yeah, and you can absolutely fill in on this. I think the coolest part about technology right now is just the influx of options that we have. How quickly people, apps, whatever, that maybe pivoted to a digital experience or virtual experience with some of that same really good content. I think if you look at it's the same thing in the business world. What we were trying to do of always coming together in person or paying someone to come in, right? Like the reach is so much greater with technology. And I think that has exposed something to us that at first we thought was detrimental. Like, oh my goodness, it's not going to be live. People aren't going to like it as much. Well, if I'm in my programming mind, if I can reach 100 people at a 95% experience, or I can reach 5 people at 100% experience, I'm going to go for the 100 people, right? And we'll work through it. But just the different options, I think one of the downfalls of communal living is that to be efficient, we have to generalize offerings, right? Technology allows us to go directly to what a person wants on demand, on their schedule, at their time. And so they I think residents now hold the reins more so than us dictating how that schedule can go. And I think the ongoing adoption of it's adoption, Francis, you mentioned it. We don't give staff tech, but yet it's such a high touch, right? So how you have to understand their reluctance a little bit because it hasn't been a part of their day to day. And it's a little disruptive right now. It has a lot of friction to it. But when we talk about, I think the coolest thing about tech, and I'll stop after this, is we're augmenting these roles, right? We are enhancing these roles. We're not taking something away. People are not replaceable. And I don't think they're indispensable. And once we get to that point, then we're selling something that's completely different than what we try to sell, right? We sell a personal experience. So I'm just so excited about the options. People need to do some research, and not everything is wonderful. But there are so many new options that are out there to involve people.
That's great. So you're seeing more innovation, more new ideas, and over time, like every other industry, we'll see a streamlining of that over time. But this is how it has to start. We have to get the ideas flowing.
Are you seeing tech companies reach out to communities to ask them what their challenges are, or are you seeing it more as the tech companies bring something to the communities?
I would love to say it's the first half of your question. I think a lot of people, a lot of the developers or the innovators have a personal story about a loved one, and it's typically the catalyst for creating XYZ solution. They all have beautiful intention. I think if there was a phase in their development to say, let me take this to 5 different types of senior living settings and actually see if this would be of value, I think they would be 3 years ahead where they are currently coming to market. Don't just be innovators. But but it's the reality. And Francis, you have communities that a wonderful solution is brought to the table with not always a sound understanding of what it's like in a community for staff, for residents, for families. But if you have that understanding and you layer that into your solution and how you educate or onboard to it, you're going to be a lot more successful.
Totally agree. It has to be a collaborative effort. It can't be one-sided. And that should be a bare minimum requirement. Agreed.
Yeah, no, because I do, in front of our listeners, I would challenge any of the tech companies that are in any stage, whether it's final product, early development, reach out to someone that is actually in whatever sector you're looking at, whether it's a hospital, a skilled nursing, assisted living, memory care, even home health, and just understand what their challenges are. Because one of the big things I look at is, does this make it harder for my staff? Is it more time consuming? Does it augment and give us the eventual goal of some reduction somewhere? Because in the end, if it doesn't benefit my staff, it might be the coolest tech out there. It's never going to be implemented. And I would challenge that. There are some really good ideas that if you catch it early enough, you could pivot to take that idea, like Kelly said, and amplify it to something that's going to be, picked up more successfully across more communities.
Right.
The other part I think I see in tech is that they solve for a specific problem at a specific point in time. And how do you develop something that can grow and be fluid and not, it's almost like don't overdevelop. If you do anything, underdevelop and then grow into it. Because I do think and be true to what you know. We can do a lot of things to try to, I think a lot of people are trying to solve for the redundancy. So let me just become everything to everyone. And I think we're missing the mark a little bit on people trying to be everything to every community.
Agreed.
I also would say that, IL is completely different from skilled. IL is different than AL. AL is different than memory care. Memory care is different from skilled. And if you think you have a solution that spans through all of that, that's resident facing,
Yikes.
yeah.
Or that's facing even. And what you're talking about is really well known for entrepreneurs, and it's called the lean startup method. And it's very well laid out, and lean startup is very much what you're talking about. You start with something small, you solve one problem, you shadow people, you interview people, you do everything you can to make sure you have the customer voice and you have someone giving you feedback. So I hope we see more of that, because we do have to start with the point solutions and not try to be all things to all people, because you end up not being anything to anybody when you do that. And so technology has a lot to offer in communities, and we know we're going to see a whole lot more technology with AI and robots. And I saw something on LinkedIn this morning about robots. So in senior living,
doing what?
I don't remember it, but I'll
please
post it.
Oy vey.
So one of the questions we always ask our guests is, who do you consider to be a maverick in your life?
Ooh.
And why? Either one of you or both of you.
Well, I'll go. I mean, where Sara and I find ourselves currently, it would be my father. My father, he's been deceased 10 years this year, very much had an entrepreneur mindset. When he passed, he had 7 companies. Some were great, some were not, but he still kept going at it. But he would give his shirt off his back for anybody in need. And I think I've landed in this position just organically to go into business with Sara, taking care of people, if you will. Allow me to say that it's just, I've come by it just through my upbringing, and I know he kind of watches over us and influences us. And Sara and I've had a couple moments where like, I think that was John Stramberg helping us out. And so that would be my answer for me.
Oh, very cool.
I love it.
Three people kind of come to mind here, and they, I think, are similar but different, and maybe have influenced me in a way. The first one I think of is Farah Gold. She was one of the first people I got to speak with when she was going off on this, but I think just her spirit of how she went about from the consulting world and seeing ideas and things that would be good for the senior space, but not backing down and not reducing margins, or kind of the idea that, well, it may or may not work and senior living is a one-off. Like, she went in with this business mind that was very impressive for me to hear about, right? It's the same thing about, I told you, like, your budget's smaller, so maybe your influence isn't as important, and therefore your commissioner wages are in line with what you oversee, right? So that was one. And then, there was a conversation we had that when Steve Moran had Dr. Bill Thomas on Evolve, and Dr. Thomas went back to Steve and just said, thank you so much for always pushing the envelope and saying things that a lot of people are scared to say, but continuing to do it. And you don't have to agree with everything. And I think Dr. Bill is in that same category, that you're not going to agree with everything they say, but just having the courage to say it and being okay. Like, people are going to not like you. If you want to do change and you want to press forward, you're going to make some people uncomfortable and mad along the way. But how do you do that graciously And so those are kind of these three people that come to mind, but it's persistence, right? And I think the biggest mavericks are, they're not a falling star that burns out, but they're just up there, still blazing and going for it. So kind of a weird answer, but those three kind of come to mind that are in this space.
That's fantastic. Those are all amazing. Both Kelly and Sara, really amazing. And I will add to that. I think the two of you are mavericks. You are doing this. Kelly, I know you joined in the middle of COVID. So that's pretty brave. I know, Sara, you've been doing this for a while, and it's been a love for you, and I want to say a calling. I don't know if that rings true for you, but when I speak with you, I feel like you're pulled towards it. It's not something you're trying to make happen. You guys have been pulled towards this because you want to make a difference, and you are. So I just want to say that congratulations to both of you, and for being brave and speaking out and making change.
You know what? My dad always taught me one thing, even when I was a little girl: no guts, no glory. Maverick-y saying.
I think it's a big line, but I don't know. Probably many movies, right? No guts, no movies. Wow, I love it. So after this conversation that we've had today, what action would you like our audience to take?
We would love to connect with people on LinkedIn. So if you'll visit both Sara and I's individual pages, or you can go to the LE3 Solutions page, and we welcome you to visit our website as well, which is le3solutions.com. There's all sorts of different forward-facing, pushing the envelope blog content. We have a robust engagement market map. So if you're wondering what any of these 200 plus solutions are coming at our senior living friends, the market map is on there. And Sara and I just want to continue to connect with people and serve and do the best we all can to just continue to raise the bar.
And start simple. I think there's so many answers that we look for on a grand scale that are right underneath us in our communities, with the staff we have, with the residents that are sitting 6 feet away, right? I don't mean that because of COVID, but they're right there. And I think as Kelly and I try to go through this, we find that we've overthought a lot of things. I think we've overprogrammed, we've overthought. We have not just gone directly to the resource of who's in your community and what do they want to do.
Right.
But it's not just one conversation, right? It's like, oh, we ask them and they say, I don't know. Well, if you ask people once a month what they want to have for dinner, they're probably not going to be able to give you an answer. Right. So again, persistence. And
so keep it simple and persistence, and the asking someone once a month and they're not going to know. I think that's so telling, because it's really like, also ask the family, bring the family in and ask the family.
Sara, you said that's something very interesting. But I think it can be simpler as how we're asking, because if we are not even offering maybe opportunities or options, if it's so open-ended that it can seem daunting, then it might shut someone down who is going to casually just go back to a custodial way to talk, right? Of like, oh, it's fine. Oh, I'm okay. Or it's good. And in reality, we're just not asking either the right way or the right type of questions to engage them. And I think we had, going back to something that we've talked about project visibility, is the way we frame our questions can give us either right or wrong answers, or already set the stage for some unconscious bias approach that I think matters. And so I applaud you with the importance of this engagement philosophy, both from a quality of life for our residents, but also for a recruiting, retention, engagement of the staff. Because in the end, if the staff's not going to stick around for more than a couple months, no relationships are ever built.
Yeah, really well said.
So I thank you. I mean, let us know how we can help in any capacity, because you guys are onto something that I think is going to really shake up and revolutionize the way we age in some of the most positive lights I've heard of in a very long time.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I heard a really, and I don't know where I heard it the other day, but it was talking about making space at least 5 hours a week to learn. And if I think there's anything that we could do better in our industry, and I have to challenge myself with too, is stop working so frantically. And if we could spend 5 hours a week of learning, right? I don't think we can move forward until we unlearn some stuff and learn something new and make space for that. And it was completely out of context of anything aging, but it would just, like, if you want to be successful and you want to continue to grow, and from a business with people, management, leadership, everything, you've got to be learning. So
well said. I think you were in the room yesterday as Francis and I and a few other people were literally talking about that very thing.
Really?
Help in senior care reminds people that education, professional learning opportunities, giving the frontline care staff learning opportunities. How are they going to stick around? How are they going to be good citizens in your world if we're not giving them opportunities at every level? So that's beautiful. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. And we will make sure for everyone listening, either now or later, that all of the links are in our post. So please be sure to reach out to Sara and Kelly. They are amazing ladies and they will engage you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the platform to be bold.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Oh, very much. Thank you, everyone listening.
This is what we need. We need more of this. And so we truly believe that this is the only way forward, is to be uncomfortable and push ourselves out of our comfort zone. So we're here always to promote the desire to disrupt and also have that positive impact. So we thank you both. Have a wonderful rest of the week and stay tuned, as we are going to release more information on our Collaboration in Aging conference, which is going to be happening September 16th and 17th in Denver in person. We will be taking the necessary precautions, so don't worry if anything, when it comes to infection control. And so we will be on top of all that, but stay tuned for a different way to look at it. So we invite you to kind of follow what we're doing and register, and we hope to see everybody in September.